That's where I keep it. So that's where the. So if you ever saw him, he's always walked like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he would, he'd walk. I saw him.
He was a pretty smart guy.
He was a smart guy.
He was so smart that when he was a kid, his mother couldn't hear him playing in the parlor. So he got the Victrola needle, put it on the guitar, played, and it came through the horn.
It's the first amplifier.
First amplifier.
Well, when he and Mary Ford did those 50s tunes, I mean, he was the first one to do looping and all that stuff that they did.
He was also an expert on acoustic instruments, guitars especially. When you see his pictures with a cowboy hat on and a Gibson L5, that's not electric, it's acoustic. And he knew more about those than anybody I know. And I picked up an old one once from George Barnes, and I brought it home that day, and just by luck, Les pulls up in a car just to say hello. He used to do that all the time. I said, Les, try this guitar out. He went, bloomp. He said, let me take it home for a while. I said, take it home. He kept it for a whole year. I saw his picture in the paper one day, and it said, had a picture. It said, Les Paul at home playing his music on my guitar. So I called him up and said, Les, I want that guitar back.
Tell me something you know about Tal Farlow.
Oh, Tal was a genius, yeah. I knew him before he even came to New York because my friend Buddy Neal was in the Army down in Greensboro. And he said, boy, there's a guitar player down there that's going to scare the hell out of you. That's what he did.
And he introduced me to him, and he didn't have hands; he had paws.
We used to. He had like hands like a picket fence. Somebody once described.
Yeah, so he said
the most gigantic hand you ever saw.
He said, "Hold your hand up." So that was me.
Yeah.
He held his hand up, and then Tal put his hand, and it was like that. And then he had such a big hand. My father said, you could play the 7-string guitar because you could use your thumb for the A string, the extra string, He goes, no, I use my thumb for the G string, which is in the middle of the guitar. That's how big his hand was.
He was describing Jim Hall, another great late guitarist, who describing to another guitar player the fact that he used a very heavy string. And he says, this thing was so heavy. He said, I am sure that he got it as a cable off of the Brooklyn Bridge. Put it on there, he says.
A very entertaining half hour with the Pizzarellis. That same weekend, the third of the 5 Marsalis brothers, trombonist Delfio, came to the Grand Hotel with his father, Ellis, Mrs. Marsalis, who passed away in 2017, and a 4th Marsalis son, Mboya.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alice and Delfio Marsalis. We figured it out that if we have Jason Marsalis come at another time, we will have personally here at the Grand Hotel supported all the Marsalis family for the years to come. Branford was here last year, and I think those people who heard that interview will agree, and I totally agree. I've been doing this for 13 years. It was the best interview we've done by anybody, okay? With the exception of the Pizzarellis.
No pressure.
I wish I could play back what he said about you, Ellis. When I asked him, how did you pick up the tenor saxophone? What's your story? How did he play tenor as opposed to some other instrument?
I'm not really sure. I mean, just based on the way that you asked me what's my story, ostensibly it's been about survival, especially when at a young age, about 13, I think, I saw Dizzy Gillespie's big band in New Orleans. And I knew when I saw that group that was what I wanted to do. The overall environmental situation was against anything that had to do with that. I kind of just plodded along, piecemealing bits and bits of information until I was finally able to figure out how to do some basics of that.
Now, you started out as a tenor saxophonist, didn't you?
No, actually, I started out on a clarinet. At the time, my favorite clarinetist was Artie Shaw, because there was some records of Artie Shaw and the Gramercy Five, which I really liked. But I got my folks to get me a clarinet. But for some reason, after I started taking music lessons at the Xavier University Junior School of Music, the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament didn't take too kindly to jazz.
I can't imagine that.
So I never did really even attempt to play jazz on a clarinet. As I got older, the tenor saxophone sort of became the instrument primarily of popular music of the day, which was called rhythm and blues. And if you could play tenor saxophone and learn the solos on most of the recordings, Fats Domino, Roy Brown, and people like that, girls would look at you. Which was not the best reason to learn to play the saxophone.
It's said that when you got into playing piano, that you were kind of going against the grain in New Orleans, as opposed to playing Dixieland. You were playing more what I would call mainstream jazz. How was that received by your fellow people?
Well, a lot of us, when I say us, what I mean is there was a group called the Young Guys, which ranged in age and 10 years beyond. And all of the people that was referred to as the Young Guys wanted to learn to play bebop and listen to the recordings of Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis. Now, the older guys was playing traditional jazz, a.k.a. Dixieland. And I probably would have learned how to do it, especially being a clarinet player. But I grew up in the segregated South, and unless you had a relative or a parent or somebody who was already playing this music, they had no access to it. Because most of the guys, even my age, that I met at a later time, they would go, like, for example, there was Papa Albert French, who was a banjo player, who played with Papa Celestine's band, which was a traditional jazz band. Well, Bob, his son, played drums, and George, his other son, played the bass. And they learned by way of their father, who was playing in a traditional jazz band. And there were numerous guys who was around my age who did a similar kind of thing. And that was the primary direction to learn that music. I think I was about 40 years old before I really began to, first of all, appreciate that music for what it was. And I was playing with a couple of guys who were the children of Albert French, and a trumpet player named Teddy Riley, who was very, very, very versed in the music of Louis Armstrong. And I started to play with them. And there was a uniqueness about the experience because what I had learned how to do musically was made the traditional jazz relatively simple. Not necessarily easy, but simple. So I could play most of the songs, but in another style. And the more I listened to them, the more I thought that I was sort of functioning on the outside of what was really going on.
I'm going to have to stop you here because we're running short on time, and I know that you have very shy and retiring children. But I want to get Delvio in on this, okay? If you had to choose among your 4 musician children, which one, I'm not talking about success or failure, I'm talking about in sheer musical ability, whom would you choose?
That's pretty easy. Jason, the youngest.
Thank you. I was going to give Delvio a spoiler alert, just in case, but I heard you speak at the Chautauqua Institution, and I asked you that question. And you said exactly what you said there. Unequivocally, the youngest drummer. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, you know. I would say, you know, Branford plays the most avant-garde. Like when you hear Branford, you have to really love jazz
Right.
to sit through a whole concert of that. And I say that lovingly
Of course.
because, you know, that's what most of us really grew up wanting to be able to do, to really not worry about the commercial kind of situation and just play at the highest possible level. And like when you hear the recordings my dad was making in the 50s, man, nobody was listening at that. He could tell you that it was like, what is this man thinking about? So I would say in that respect, Branford has followed in my dad's stead the most in terms of just how he played. You know, he's done other musics with other bands, but when he's playing his own music, it's something else.
Yeah. And what about Wynton?
You know, Wynton is an extremely hard worker, and he has a certain kind of vision, and he was the person that was able to come out. And I'd say his dedication to classical music was really the tipping point, and that's what opened the doors for the Jazz at Lincoln Center. And how he runs the jazz orchestra now is really like a symphony orchestra. If you go to, you know, the way that the concert is presented, and you have to respect the music, it's on the highest level. You know, he works really hard. He's always prepared. And, I mean, he's been the greatest example for all of us of, you know, professionalism at the highest level, and he's always there. Emotionally, spiritually, and technically, you know, he's always there.
And what about Delvio?
Oh, well, he's the man. I mean, that's... what can you say? I mean, just... Well, you know, people would say, well, why did you choose the trombone? But I feel that the trombone kind of chose me because in the New Orleans band, we always say the trumpet plays the lead. It has to be an individual who doesn't really pay attention to anybody else and has their own single vision, no matter what else is going on. They're just... And then the saxophone's job is to argue and to fight with the trumpet, but also at sometimes to agree and to harmonize. Then the trombone comes along and says, hey, bro, everything is cool. It's going to be all right. So being the middle child, I think I'm perfectly suited for kind of that role of just keeping the peace. Saying, hey, it's all right. It's cool. You know? Yeah, okay.
We could obviously spend an hour here talking about many different things here, but time is short. So we're going to entertain some questions from, yes.
I was just wondering, are there any new artists to look for at Jazz Fest this year?
Any new artists?
Or someone special I should look for?
Some young
that I
people,
might
maybe.
miss in the hullabaloo of the...
Well, I think you may be asking the wrong person for that. See, every now and then I do get a question asked about jazz in New Orleans and what's going on and all of that. Well, I don't hang out. And there are clubs where I hear about and have never been to. And I understand that there are some jazz musicians who are playing there. And a lot of them are young people. Now, Delvio probably knows a lot more about that than I do.
No, I don't.
Well, the recent crop, I mean, Nicholas Payton and Terrence Blanchard and people like that who are now well established, but that was the younger group not too long ago, right? I mean, and these were all something in the water down there, I guess, huh?
Yeah, and then, of course, you never know with Jazz Fest who's going to get the gigs. You know, I remember the year after Hurricane Katrina, and a reporter said, you know, the jazz festival looks like it's really, 2 years after. He said, after Hurricane Katrina, it looks like it's really thriving and it's such and such. And I said, well, I'm noticing that each year there's less and less jazz. I said, so within a decade it should really be big because, they have, whoever they're going to bring, Bon Jovi.